I'd say that I've been naive, maybe ignorant the entirety of my life about how politics infects everything. And as Brittney Griner is being released and our democracy has been threatened by just general stuff Russia is doing, from bots to disinformation to going to war with Ukraine, Russia has been the enemy of this country, and I don't know what the most offensive thing over the 4 years of Donald Trump was, but being a traitor who was in bed with that government, clearly and obviously, in a way that can be felt all over South Florida with the Trump properties and the Russian money that pours in over here. Clearly and obviously, when Joe Biden puts up photographs and the news of, I just spoke to Brittney Griner, she is safe, she's on a plane, she's coming home. And the transaction is Brittney Griner wrongly detained for a silly vape crime and sent to the worst of the Russian penal colonies because she was used not as a human being, but as a clear and obvious propaganda and political tool to get back somebody nicknamed the Merchant of Death, Victor Bout, a man who was
also sanctions buster, which is a way weaker nickname.
But he's just a terrorist threat of the highest order. He was trying to kill Americans. Like, this is not a vape crime. And Russia wanted him and others. And now it will become about more and more politics. And people will say, well, what about Paul Whelan and all the other people who aren't famous like Brittney Griner? And the Whelan family is saying, quote, there is no greater success than for a wrongful detainee to be freed and for them to go home. The Biden administration made the right decision to bring Ms. Griner home and to make the deal that was possible rather than waiting for one that wasn't going to be. This is a happy day, even if we can parse the politics and the transaction of it. Brittney Griner is coming home safe to her loved ones. I don't want to do the politics after that. I don't want to wonder whether Biden is putting up all the happy photos so that he could get a political win, or he really cares about the humanity of Brittney Griner. Russia wrongly detained, smartly if you're dabbling in evil, wrongly detained a big black woman from the NBA, famous in America, at the center of polarizing fights all over the place that we have in America about homosexuality. She is a symbol that Russia took wrongly because they knew the power of taking that symbol and creating the unrest in America that would make more divisions and more political fights. I am thrilled that Brittney Griner is coming home. I'm not interested in arguing the politics of this, whether it was a fair trade or whether Biden did the right thing soon enough. Hostage crises are tough. Getting people home are tough. I can't swim in these waters. I'm not savvy enough to know what it takes to get a released. I can just be happy that Brittney Griner is coming home and can no longer be used as that political tool wrongly detained. And Kate Fagan will be with us here shortly to break down a little more of this. But you received this news how? The group received this news how?
Well, I think you mentioned the reasons why it's complicated, but it is ultimately happy for Brittney Griner's family. Now, she doesn't get to immediately go home. She has to be debriefed, and she's going to a hospital first. And it's going to take time for her to be back in a quote-unquote normal setting. And that's like ultimately the tragedy of it, is that she's going to be changed forever by this experience. But at the very least, she's not going to be there anymore. She can be with her wife. She can be with her family. Hopefully she'll get to see her teammates in the coming days and the people that have been supporting her and trying to help get her released from the prison. But yeah, it's complicated politically, like you said, and her wife was pushing for Paul Whelan to also come home. She spoke about it today in the press conference in the White House. And that is something that is ongoing and is not resolved through any of this. But Brittney Griner is coming home. It is happy news. It's certainly not going to be something where she wakes up tomorrow and it's all behind her, though. This is really has changed her and her family's lives forever.
Not just coming home, though. The other thing that is an enormous relief here is that the family does not anymore have to deal with the terror-soaked unknown of this person we love is in the worst Russian penal colony. What is that? What is this person we love going through at the height of evil and horror in the middle of a country that doesn't play by the same rules that freedom plays by, and is deciding in the middle of the apocalypse of today to go to war against Ukraine?
The hard thing, as you guys have all alluded to, is what is the value? How do we put a value on a human life, right? If we can save Brittney Griner, but we can't get Paul Whelan back, right? Don't you do that? Don't you go as incrementally as possible, because every life is precious and we get what we can get.
The Whelan family is saying that.
Right.
The Whelan family that has more invested there than any of us is saying we are happy anytime a wrongfully detained person can can get to freedom.
And some detail on that is that he was accused of spying.
Right.
So the Biden administration has said that Russia's treating his case differently. They want the U.S. to exchange a spy for a spy, but the U.S. denies that he was spying in Russia, and also that they have any Russian spies detained in the U.S. So they're treating the case differently, and that's why the Biden administration is claiming that they weren't able to get him released as well.
So, be that as it may, I think there is an extra optimism to that when we say it's hard to put the value of a life, and you go as incrementally as possible because each one saved is a success. How often can we say when dealing with those circumstances that the life of a black person, the life of a black woman, the life of a gay black woman got to be the one? Usually those are the lives that are put at the back of the line. When we're saying, every incremental one, with meaning somebody's going to be left out in the cold, typically someone of Brittney Griner's background is not the recipient of that.
I would love to see an honest, not that you get that from Russia, an honest look at the machinations when she was in that airport line of the decision that got made. How much unrest can we cause by grabbing this woman who's only playing over there because American teams don't pay the women well enough? Like the political propaganda symbol that Brittney Griner was, it was astute for evil to grab her and be like, yeah, Merchant of Death is what we want back. And they wanted more than that. They wanted somebody else like that. Let's bring in Kate Fagan here. She's been tracking this story for a long time now. And there have been a lot of people who have cared about Brittney Griner and supported Brittney Griner. You can hear her as well on Meadowlarkers today, where they're attacking the Jerry Jones stuff with Amin and Howard Bryant. Welcome, Kate. First things first, what did you think of the news? What was your instantaneous reaction beyond happiness for Brittney, who you know a little bit?
Well, I was actually surprised. I didn't think this was going to get done until after the new year. Not that I had intel or people reporting back, but just in being close to the people who are close to her, it was fascinating to see how every other story you cover in the sports world, especially, no matter how tight people want things, you get drips and drops of the story ahead of time, but not in this case, because this is at an entirely different level than even the most even the most newsworthy trade or move or anything that happens in sports. This was completely different. This was nobody had any idea around her except probably those extremely, extremely close. And all that information was so closely guarded because you knew and you could understand leading into it that even leaking just a little bit of optimism or hope to the media could send this thing spiraling again. So, I mean, obviously I was thrilled at the news, but also really surprised that it happened. What in February I would have said if she was held 10 months wouldn't have been quickly, but as this thing carried on, to have her home before the holidays, in my mind now, given what I thought we were looking at, they worked very fast.
You've been hesitant to talk about some of this stuff because there are just so many unknown dangers around it, and you legitimately know and care about some of the people involved who have been scared and hurting here. Can you tell us, as politics will grab this, Kate, I can imagine Fox News right now summoning its forces to be like, how could we trade for this? This human life isn't worth what we've traded. The merchant of death, create the horrors and the propaganda and everything that needs to be created around creating division. I'm sure this will become a political football that isn't all just happy Brittney Griner's home.
Yeah, and I already have, in the cynicism that I possess in my heart, and I don't know if you all have already touched on this, there's a small part of me that wonders if part of the reason Russia made this deal is because they knew that releasing Brittney Griner and not Paul Whelan, a Marine, would send certain people spiraling, again, to use that phrase, as you have already started to see. If you see any of the reactions to what's happening, and I'm sure y'all have touched on it because I heard a meme there a couple minutes ago, in my cynical heart, I'm like, is this another way to divide America by releasing Brittney Griner? And I've been thinking a lot too, Dan, about how, we over the last 2.5 years since COVID, we've started to do these sort of equations over what a human life is worth. During COVID, it was, well, all right, this many human lives, but this lost money to the economy. And I'm not saying that there isn't a time and place for that, but it almost feels like as a society, we have gotten used to now having these discussions about what a human life is worth on the economic scale and how it will affect us geopolitically. And that's a dangerous place for those of us who are not actually legitimately in the economic ball game of doing that to start doing, which we have been doing as laymen over this story of what is Brittney Griner's life worth on a geopolitical scale versus, obviously as a human being, and especially as one who is very closely tied to the women's basketball community. That is not an equation I think that any of us should, outside of like those who are actually paid to do it, should be trading in.
But this is very transactional, though, Kate. This is literally a transaction where they're telling you the argument's going to be about, what do you mean? A famous black woman, lesbian basketball player, her human life and freedom is worth more than a wrongly detained military man's. Like, isn't that what... The next conversation after how happy are we that Brittney got home, not everyone's happy about that, I suppose. Isn't that the next conversation? If everything's a transaction and everything is content and everything is something to be argued about, isn't this going to be infested with that?
I think we can let other people have that argument, right? I don't think we need to have that argument on this show. I think that we understand the value in her life and we are happy that she's home. And if there are going to be bad faith arguments made about all of this, maybe they should be elsewhere. I don't know. Kate, what do you think?
I mean, obviously the sports world trades on arguments that are unwinnable. I spent a lot of years at ESPN trading in arguments that you were never going to find out if you were right or you were wrong. And so here's another one, except the stakes are incredibly high, incredibly personal to many, many people. Yeah, we could sit here and we can argue about the collateral damage of how this will impact Americans abroad, which we have absolutely no answers to, and we'll really never be able to do the math on that. And Brittney Griner's life versus Paul Whelan's life versus other captive Americans. Yes, if we wanted to do that, we could sit here and do that. To what end? I don't know. Or we could step back and say, okay, what did we learn from this from a sports level? And there's a lot of other discussions. Maybe they're not as popular, maybe they don't move the needle as much, to actually step back and say, okay, how is this going to impact the future of the women's basketball game abroad? What does this say about the W and the WNBA and the way that they organized incessantly and relentlessly around Brittney Griner? And I'm not saying that the NBA wouldn't have done that if it was one of their brethren. We won't know. But there are other conversations to have. But apparently they're just not conversations that the audience are really that interested in, because it happens to be that those are the foundation, those conversations, the foundation of them are in women's sports. So we don't really want to trade in that discussion. We want to trade in this other unwinnable discussion. And it's just a matter of what we care about and what we want to put our effort into, because there's a lot of interesting things that happen that don't involve us pressing the contrarian button and having us devolve into like what one human life is worth versus another.
Kate, as Brittney is flying back now from Abu Dhabi, where the exchange happened, what do you expect her mental state is going to be? I mean, I can't imagine someone comes off of that experience and like tomorrow is in the gym and will be ready to go by May 1st or whenever the season starts. So what road do you think lies ahead of her in terms of recovering from this experience?
Yeah, I mean, in all the time I've spent with Brittney, I've always been really surprised at her resiliency. Mm-hmm. And then also that's always been mirrored with the kind of naivete and youthfulness. And there were always points where you would say, okay, you know, as she gets older, some of that almost like bordering on like just like her, like people around her would say, like, she'd rather just be skateboarding down the street. You know, I imagine, and I've thought about this a lot over the last 8 or 9 months, that all of that will be gone, right? There will be no slow maturation process for Brittney. As you know, as people around her have always said, like, she's always kind of slowly and steadily started to understand her role in like the W and her role in the game, and slowly embracing that. I have hopes, because I know her a little bit, that this won't have crushed her. You know, that again, they're everyone there, and that's probably part of like the reintegration process. We're going to learn whether or not anything happened to her that is beyond kind of the scope of what we expected, but she's incredibly resilient, and I imagine we're going to see a very different person, but I don't think we're going to see a broken one. I think, you know, when it comes to storylines, right, it's a little too soon. She's still on a plane home or on a plane to where she's going for the process. But I mean, this is an epic storyline for next season for the W, and what this means on a larger scale for the future of women's basketball. But I have high hopes that Brittney herself is going to come back. Is going to come back from this like a much stronger person.
Pretty hard to answer that question. Pretty impossible. It might not crush her, but
right.
Something pretty clearly will be stolen from her here. I don't think that can be disputed. I'm curious, Kate, if you can tell us two different things here. Emotionally and intellectually, what do you find most interesting here? Because those are two different questions.
Wow, Dan, that's a tough one to pull. I mean, emotionally, I probably feel like I don't know that there has been a night since Brittney Griner, the news broke on at the New York Times that she had been detained by Russia. There has not been a night before I went to sleep that I didn't say out loud, I am grateful that I'm getting into this bed tonight and that I am safe. Because this is, you know, we have all read in the past about Americans detained abroad and hostage situations, but this is somebody that I have, you know, I'm not close friends with, but I have sat across from and shared meals with. And so emotionally, that's what has registered for me beyond anything. I mean, they did a campaign, We Are BG, where you could write a letter to BG at various points, and with the promise that her Russian lawyers would be able to get some of them to her. And, you know, I wrote one of those letters because I found it hard to like truly enjoy the simple things that we take for granted, understanding the situation she was in. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but like emotionally, that's what I've been thinking about in these last like 10 months. I mean, intellectually, I'm sort of handcuffed because I see people's responses. The clearest one is I can't believe we're trading for a lesbian basketball player instead of a Marine. And intellectually, I feel handcuffed because I have learned over the last 10 years of, you know, at times talking for a living, that there's nothing I could say or any of us could say on this show one way or another that's going to make a dent in that kind of really surface level divisive opinion. And so there's a cynicism that I have there, kind of bringing it full circle to what we were saying at the top here of, you kind of see the reaction and you wonder if this is all another layer of Machiavellian geopolitical maneuvering by Russia. And so intellectually, I have a deep cynicism about what Brittney Griner coming home instead of somebody else means for how America is going to react to it.